Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Milken Institute, and thanks for being here on this busy and cold Tuesday evening. My name is Matt Horton. I work in our California Center here, and we here at the Milken Institute are grateful to KPCC's president, Bill Davis, and John, Melanie, Janice, Liz, and the whole production team for being outstanding partners in this series of forums. This is the final in a series of forums focused on the most important affordability issues facing Californians. As you may know, the Institute is a nonpartisan, nonprofit economic policy think tank. In the California Center, we help leaders address issues concerning policy development related to the state's economy and the long-term economic viability. Our series of discussions on affordability addresses the fact that thousands of Californians face the possibility of being priced out of their communities. We're exploring the rising cost of education and housing and the dwindling opportunity for many to reach or remain within the middle class. We will use the recommendations and expert analysis from this forum series as a platform to inform policy recommendations in 2016 and beyond. The next Milken Institute forum is Thursday, November 19th, when we will welcome Adar Turner, a former chair of the UK Financial Services Authority, interviewed by Matt Miller, Senior Vice President in Capital Strategy Research and former host of Left, Right, and Center. They will be discussing Adar's new book, Between Debt and the Devil: Money, Credit, and Fixing Global Finance. For today's panel, please tweet, text, and email your questions to the information listed on the screens, and help me welcome Managing Producer from KPCC, Mr. John Cohn.
Thanks, Matt. Thank you, everybody, for coming out tonight. First and foremost, we just want to thank all of our colleagues at the Milken Institute, Kevin Clouden, Matt Horton, Jeffrey Monford, and the rest of the outstanding folks here, without whom this collaboration, I think, would not have been as successful and effective as it has been. In addition to this series, we also collaborated with the Milken Institute, KPCC and the Milken Institute, on two events looking at water and drought, which obviously is a very pressing issue in Southern California, as well as I think the event we kicked off our collaboration was with a panel on job flight, which was also incredibly important to the good folks in Southern California and specifically Hollywood. So we're thrilled to be able to do this, and we look forward to the next one. I've been advised strongly by Kevin and folks that has to happen after the summit, so we'll be looking at 2016. KPCC, we're very geared to engaging the community on a variety of topics and issues in depth. So to that end, when we do some of our off-site events, we bring this little mobile recording unit that's back there. So if there's thoughts, input, things that you would like to share after the program, we would love to hear from you. It's kind of fun. You get to be Larry Mantle for a day, or at least for a couple minutes, and we would seriously appreciate that. A bit of housekeeping. We are recording all the audio for the program, and we are live video streaming. So I'd ask that if you can put your devices on silent, we do encourage that you use them, but if you could just kind of turn them to silent, and if you take any photos, that's fine. Just take the flash off. We have a couple other people doing that for us this evening. So thank you again for coming, and without further ado, I would like to introduce you to KPCC's business reporter, Ben Bergman.
For coming out. And again, please put your phones on silent, but don't put them away because we want you to use them to ask questions. You can text or email us, and then we're going to have some time for questions at the end. So thank you for coming out tonight for what is sure to be a very uplifting panel. That's a joke, because these are quite serious issues, and I'm going to read a few stats just to get everyone in a very depressed mood about our state. So the U.S. employment rate is now 5%. The unemployment rate in California, 5.9%. LA, 6.2%. A third of the California workforce have training beyond high school, but short of a bachelor's degree. Of the 30 biggest metro areas in the U.S., Los Angeles ranks 28th in educational attainment, behind only Las Vegas and Riverside. From 1990 to 2012, only 3 of the 30 major metro areas in the U.S. had declining payrolls. They were Cleveland, which had minus 2.6%, Detroit, minus 6%, and L.A. County, minus 7.1%, more than Cleveland and Detroit. And finally, LA has the worst housing affordability in the country, which you probably know because we're in Santa Monica. That's, of course, a lot to do with our incomes. So that sort of sets the table for the fabulous panel we have here, and I'm going to introduce them now, starting with Kevin Clouden, who is so nice to have us here at the Milken Institute. He is managing economist at the Milken Institute and managing director of its California Center, which focuses on economic issues connected to job creation, technology-based development, and California's role in the global economy. Good to have you here, Kevin.
Very glad to have you here.
Thank you. Yes, you are having me here, actually. You're right. Next, we have Von Toon Quinlivan. She is Vice Chancellor for Workforce and Economic Development at California Community Colleges. She's also Vice Chair of the National Skills Coalition, Co-Chair of the Workforce Action Team of the California Economic Summit, and serves on the California Council of Science and Technology. In 2013, she was named a White House Champion of Change, a real expert in this field. Thank you so much for being here. And next we have Jessica Goodhart. She's a director of Repower LA at Lane, that's Los Angeles Alliance for the New Economy. Repower LA advocates for energy efficient investment in LA's Department of Water and Power. Jessica has been at Lane since 1997 and was research director there for many years, where she did many studies on living conditions in LA. So thank you so much for joining us, Jessica.
Thank you for having me.
And finally, we have Russell Ragsdale. He is Strategic Planning Principal Manager of Grid Modernization in the Electric System Planning Department at Southern California Edison. I hope you have a very big business card, because that is a long title. That title means he's basically helping modernize our power grid, right? Okay. Yep. Well, so a lot of great people here, from workers and labor to employers to economists from community colleges. So the perfect field here tonight to discuss these daunting challenges, which we are going to solve tonight. And so we're going to start with you, Kevin. And I sort of laid out some of the basic facts, but give us some more about why this is such a critical issue for California and what this skills gap means to our state.
California has a reputation as being the high-tech and innovation center, not only for the United States, but for the world. And in many ways, that's actually true. If you look at the rate at which jobs have been added in California for the last several years, they have been primarily been added, and certainly the most well-paying jobs have been in high technology. The catch is that over the last few years, they've largely been added up in the Bay Area, not anywhere else in California. There have been pockets elsewhere, particularly in the west side of LA County and in Orange County and parts of San Diego, but fundamentally, the Bay Area has led the way because California's main competitive advantage comes from the fact that it is this great center of innovation and technology. Now, that being said, what people forget is that once upon a time, the largest center of high technology employment, not only in the state of California, but in many ways in the US, was Southern California. Back in around 1990, California as a whole had nearly 20% of all high-tech employment in the United States. So nearly 1 in 5 high-tech jobs were in California. And one of the largest shares of it, indeed the largest share, was actually in Southern California, particularly being driven by the fact that we were the center of aerospace, we were the center of space programs, we were the place that the space shuttle was made, we were the place where new airplanes were made, satellites, and a number of key engineering projects. That went away in the 1990s. And the distinction is that when jobs began to be added back again, in the dot-com bubble, they were mostly started being added up north. Now, even though the high-tech jobs were going away, at the same time what was happening is that Southern California, and LA in particular, was developing itself as one of the greatest centers of globalization and immigration anywhere in the world. We have more people from more different countries with more different backgrounds. The catch is that when new waves of immigrants come in, unless they're being recruited by companies or they're retained from our colleges and graduate schools, they tend to come in with skills that are either insufficient for the jobs that we've been creating over the last couple decades, or they aren't compatible. Either their degrees and their backgrounds aren't recognized, they might be their skills might be out of date. In other ways, they don't match up. So the end result is that the educational attainment level in LA County has actually been going down at the same time as the educational attainment levels in other parts of the country have gone up. And that is a gap that we fundamentally need to address if we want LA to create more high-paying jobs and not just jobs that allow people to barely get by.
And why have the skills been going up in the rest of the country?
Well, not everywhere, but in a number of places they're going up because we used to have among the best educational attainment. And what's happened is that as people who have come in and have basically been finding jobs where they have that don't require as many skills as opposed to the ones that do, the people who have the skills, who are educated here in LA or elsewhere in California, they decide that they can't afford to live here, the jobs that they want aren't here, or the skills that they have that don't necessarily match up, so they move. And so what winds up happening is that we have huge outflows of families, we have huge outflows of skilled individuals. They go somewhere else, and the people who can't afford to move and the people who are here, in many cases, are the people who can't afford or don't have access to the skills and the education that they need for the jobs that want to be created.
And so, but is there a net outflow of people? Our population is still growing.
Our population is still growing, but if you took away immigration, our population would be shrinking. Immigrants are in fact responsible not only for the net increase overall in the population, but in fact, children of immigrants are significantly are at a much higher number than proportionately speaking. Is that immigrant families are more likely to have more kids, their kids are more likely to stay around, and that means that things that make a huge benefit in terms of the cultural landscape of LA, things that mean that you in terms of the overall diversity, overall interactions, things that make the city so wonderful in many ways, the problem is that at the same time, people who are coming in as immigrants don't necessarily have access to the knowledge of how to get the education or awareness of what kind of skills that they should be getting and how those skills benefit them.
What about companies? Because we hear a lot of times from Republican governors like Governor Rick Perry or Rick Scott from Florida that they in Florida and Texas are taking our companies because it's so horrible to be a company here. Is that actually happening?
Well, they're not necessarily taking the companies per se as much as what they're doing is that they're taking the expansion of the companies. In a lot of cases, companies decide that if they're going to build a new factory or they're going to build some place that requires mid-skilled jobs, they're going to do it in a place that's a lot cheaper, and more often, it's a lot faster. A factory that was built here in California because of the way that permits operate in the process for approval, it could take 2 or 3 years here where it might take 6 months in a different state. And that is a huge issue. And at the same time, it's worth noting that Texas, when under Rick Perry, it was the greatest center of jobs and job creation in the U.S., at one point, I think it had a quarter where it added as many jobs as the rest of the U.S. as a whole. The catch is the vast, vast majority of those jobs are really low-paying jobs. They were low-skilled jobs where basically they moved to Texas because it was so cheap, because the costs were so cheap. And what that says is that if you, in California, our comparative advantage against Texas or comparative advantage against Florida is in creating those higher skilled jobs. And because we are the entrepreneurial center of the United States, more small businesses are created in LA County than anywhere else. More small businesses and new ideas get created here. We need to be able to educate people to take advantage of those businesses when they grow.
And we still have those skills even though our overall human capital is low. It sounds like there's just a very wide disparity, lows.
There's absolutely a disparity there, and quite often we have an issue where people who have skills often have skills because of the jobs that they've been pursuing, but they need to adapt them. A lot of cases, what had been considered to be mid-skill jobs require now a 2-year degree, or they require a certification, or they require knowledge of technology in a way that they didn't previously. And once upon a time, LA was not just LA County was not just the manufacturing center of the U.S., which it still is. More manufacturing is done in LA County than anywhere else in the U.S., but it was also a heavy manufacturing center. Any of you ever watched Smokey and the Bandit, for example? That Trans Am was made in LA. But there haven't been any cars made in LA County since 1990. But that is the kind of thing that used to happen here. Space shuttles were made here. They're made out in Downey. And it wasn't just cars, but it was parts. It was all sorts of different jobs that required a certain level of skills. But now, if those jobs were going to come back, whether it would be a Tesla or anybody else, they're going to require more skills. And what would have been good 20 years ago, 30 years ago, is no longer good enough.
And Fisker actually did say they are coming back and they're going to build the first cars here since 1990.
Absolutely, but they're also going to be building it out near Riverside, Moreno Valley.
Yes.
But yes, that they are going to do it, and that is actually really good news. And it says a recognition that there are the skilled individuals here, and that they know that that is the fact. And it's worth remembering that from a design standpoint, LA, and if you add Orange County, is the car design center of the world. We are among the industrial design centers of the world. What we need to do is to train people up and have their ability to get jobs that take advantage of that design expertise, and as well as the entrepreneurship.
Which we're going to talk about now. And Russell, I want to bring you in as our employer representative here, speaking for all of the businesses in California. But no, you work for a very big company. It has around $13 billion in revenue, and you have about 14,000 employees in California. And, I think a lot of people think of the power business as people going up and fixing poles. Not that that's easy, but not necessarily the most high-tech jobs. But you are really involved with the transformation to a smarter grid and trying to find the workers to go along with that. So talk about that challenge of finding employees who are up to snuff for how you're trying to change Southern California Edison.
Yeah, absolutely. We're entering a new grid, as we call it, a 21st century grid. And although as a power company we've existed for over 125 years, and really, simply put, we put sticks in the ground and hang wire on those sticks, we're starting to see that things are changing as we move into the future. And there's an increased amount of technology that's going to be required as part of the grid to support the changes and the emphasis that we're putting on environmental sustainability in California. So we see these other technologies such as solar, photovoltaics, as well as energy storage being integral components of the electrical grid as we move forward. I mean, already at Southern California Edison, we've interconnected more than 100,000 solar installations, and we see that continuing to grow. And in order for the grid to be able to handle that and integrate those technologies, the grid itself needs to become more intelligent. We need to have smarter systems that are on the grid to give us more information on what's happening, and we need to have the ability to interpret that data and that information that's happening on the grid and make decisions on how to operate the grid. And that's where we think that there's a huge opportunity to look for a more evolved workforce at the electric utility. And so we're actually excited when we go out and talk to colleges and students about the electric utility, because it's not the same old kind of boring utility that you had to kind of sell to talent in the old days, but we're really talking about transforming into more of a high-tech industry. However, when you go and you look at the engineering programs and you look at the workforce that's available, the curriculum is not necessarily evolved to expand to that type of technology that we see in the future. So I think that's the challenge that we're going to have to overcome in the near 5 to 10 year time frame, is taking traditional type of electrical engineering programs, traditional type of electric system capacities and capabilities, and complementing those with the ability to operate more advanced IT technology, really being able to utilize this information, this additional information that's available to the grid, perform increased analytics. And we're seeing that really, across different industries, the availability of, increased availability of data and big data is requiring some specific capabilities to be able to derive analytics around that data and draw conclusions. And so we see a workforce that needs to evolve to be able to handle kind of a new way in which we operate the grid, in which we manage the grid, and in which we know the pulse of the grid at any given time.
And when you go out there and try to recruit for those positions, how hard is it?
Well, I think what we've tried to do is build a pipeline, right, and start, at least in the STEM space, start early and encourage from a high school level getting that education in science, technology, engineering, and math, and really influencing. I mean, we contribute to scholarships. We go out and we run tutoring sessions and leadership sessions, really trying to encourage the younger folks to start to take an interest in these types of educations and degrees in order to prepare them for what we think we're going to need when we go to recruit from these colleges. However, traditional kind of engineering education for electrical engineering is very focused, and it's based on how the utility has run for many, many years. And so we're starting to partner with many of the universities, sitting on their industry advisory councils, working with them to try and evolve that curriculum to start to account for what are the other skills, how does the system now work as a whole, rather than be focused on some specific kind of traditional electrical engineering concepts, so that we can build that talent and that workforce that we need to be able to manage these things in the future.
Well, Vaughn, you oversee a lot of that effort to train up that workforce. There's 113 community colleges in California. I gather that you see them as very vital to solving this problem.
Yes, I mean, I'd love to sort of connect two dots. I mean, I used to be on the employer side dealing with the skill gap and working with the public system in order to do that. And I just want to go back to a point that was made earlier to Kevin. Kevin is, absolutely right on the question of why are skills going up. And I'd like to put out sort of just a few facts around there. There's a new gateway into the workforce, and that gateway 65% of new jobs will require some level of post-secondary training as compared to 30, 40 years ago. 30, 40 years ago, between then and now, the country actually created 63 million new jobs. But if you have a high school degree or less, there's 2 million less jobs for you. So the gateway back then, you could expect come out of high school, you could expect to be able to, afford a good life for your family. Nowadays, 65% of the jobs require some level of post-secondary education. But that's not necessarily a bachelor degree. It's true, we have a million expected in shortage of a bachelor's degree, but there's also an equal and equally strong and probably faster growing segment called the middle skill jobs. And these are industry valued middle skill credentials where you need to have either a certificate, an AA, or an industry recognized credential as the gateway to get into the workforce. I have a friend who argues that he said, it was once an industrial economy, and then it went to the knowledge economy, and he would argue that we're moving into a retraining economy. There's some truth to what he says. There's an economist that Kevin probably knows, Anthony Carnevale. He is one of the foremost workforce economists in the country. And he explained a phenomenon that happened in the last recession that I didn't fully appreciate until he explained it. And this is the concept of decoupling. So in prior recessions, companies operated at a certain level of productivity, and then they had a certain level of workers. And during the downturn, they would lay off the worker, and their productivity would go down, right? And so when recovery happened, you hire more workers, increase productivity. What happened in this last recession was the relationship between productivity and workers decoupled. So actually, the country maintained its productivity because of the high rate of adoption of technology while laying off the workers. And so when the economy started turning around, the workers wanted to go back, but it's not the same jobs. The jobs had evolved thanks to the technology. And so really the imperative to go not only skill up the first time, but skill up and then reskill and upskill continuously is a real challenge. And it's a challenge that really the public institutions, our post-secondary institutions, colleges and community colleges all need to step up to do. And this is where I want to also put out a plug for this area of career technical education, which is the area that really produces a lot of the workers that may populate the utilities. I mean, if your electricity goes out in the middle of the night, who do you call to come out and restore the electricity? It's a line worker, and they're trained in the middle skill area. That's how they're trained. If you're in a hospital and somebody needs to read your X-rays, I mean, that's a technician. Those are middle skill jobs. So many of these middle skill jobs are well paying. It affords you to live in California. It takes about to break $60,000 for a family of 4 to live in California. And a lot of
Not here.
Not here, right? Not here. Everywhere else.
Think about that.
Right, but the average community college graduate out of career technical education programs average $68,000, and that's why the state has begun to really look at career technical education programs, especially at community colleges, as a strategy to move people out of poverty, but to also as a strategy to continue the skilling of Californians.
So if I'm a 20-year-old, what field or what position should I most go into that will get me the highest paying job and will be easiest to get because there's such a shortage of them?
All right, I'm glad you asked that question because I get a chance to brag. This is actually from our website, which has the salary surfer. So it takes all of our graduates 2 years before they finish their degree or certificates, and then 2 years after and 5 years after, mapping to their actual wages, not individual, on average, right, on aggregate. So we're talking about 2 years of education or less. So our average students who are cardiovascular technicians, 73,000. Diagnostic medical sonography, 83,000. Radiotherapy technicians, 98,000. Wastewater and wastewater technicians, 86,000. Okay, I'm building up here. Laser and optical technicians, 104,000. And then finally, electrical systems and power transmission, which is Russ's area, 110,000. So it's incredible return on investment, but very little known.
And those are really 2-year degrees.
2-year degrees or less. Wow. So, but it's, our challenge is we're not very good at talking about ourselves until we got some data here. And so really the challenge is to increase awareness that these are good post-secondary options for many.
Well, and how do you let students know who have no idea even what those jobs are, that that's something that they should pursue?
It's true, like health informatics, medical tomography. I mean, like as many degrees as there are in the room, it's very hard to counsel your children or your friends or your neighbors to go into these fields because they're evolving constantly. So the challenge of career exploration, the challenge of making sure that we get the word out on these options. I think that's a joint challenge of the region and of the community.
Mm. Well, I want to bring in Jessica, be sort of as our voice of workers here. And I'm curious how you see this whole issue of a skills gap and what we talked about in terms of declining income, and how much of it is a skills problem and how much of it is a wage problem.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with the other panelists, the importance of training and training that's linked to real careers. But I don't want us to have the impression that there's this natural divide between high-wage jobs and low-wage jobs, that the high-skilled jobs are high-wage jobs and the lower-skilled jobs are low-wage jobs. Many of our high-skilled jobs, like the manufacturing jobs, that many of them which have gone from the region, became high-skilled jobs because workers organized to make them high-skilled jobs. And we have here in LA City really a crisis of low-wage work and a huge informal economy, right? So as those payroll jobs are declining, the informal economy has been increasing. And so we must, and we should invest in training, but if we don't pay attention to raising the floor, if we don't take a look at our workers who are misclassified as independent contractors, but really should be considered employees, like our truck drivers, who are, taking our iPhones right from the Port of LA to warehouses, and are called, they're called independent contractors, but they're really should be classified as employees and have the rights of employees. If we don't pay attention to those things, the problem of low wages is going to persist. So I think it's a both-and strategy. My work at Lane is actually a project that focuses on a training program that leads people to careers at our public utility. I think that's an incredible opportunity, and I've seen the power of that training program to completely transform people's lives. And it's an amazing thing to see. But I also know that there are, only so many jobs, even at a utility that's facing waves of retirement when you compare to the need. And meanwhile, so many people who are kind of patching together part-time work, and so much risk that's been shifted onto employees, over the past several decades.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm curious, we've done a whole other panel in this series, I think, on the $15 minimum wage. But if you, as an economist, looking at that, the fact that that's going to be implemented in the city of LA in 2020, and a lot of other cities like Santa Monica are following suit, how much does that help with this problem, or does it not help?
Well, it helps when people are in the legitimate, so to speak, or the on-the-books economy. When you've got a situation where people already have those jobs, yes, it absolutely helps. It makes a difference for people who are fundamentally being underpaid in service jobs. But there's a catch. The catch is that it also at the same time discourages people who might have moved from or rather companies and employers who might have moved from the informal economy into the formal economy. That you've got a situation where a number of years ago we did a study on for the LA economy, and what we found was that from the 1990s into 2000s that the city of LA had been utterly flat in terms of jobs created, and yet significantly more people were there and were not calling themselves unemployed. So what happened? Those jobs were basically being created in the informal economy and at a rate higher than almost anywhere else in the U.S. And what it meant is that if you work in the informal economy, you're not going to have access to the benefits to the same degree, if at all. You're not going to necessarily have access to a lot of the same rights, and you're not going to have access to the $15 minimum wage. Instead, what you're going to do is you're going to be in a situation where there might be a trickle-down effect to some extent. I hate using that term, but that's fundamentally how it works, where it creates wage pressures. And there have been a number of employers who've talked about that. It will create wage pressures even in the informal economy, and that's the hope. But the catch is that you have to accompany a raising of the minimum wage with a move to fundamentally bring people out of the informal economy into the formal on-the-books economy. You need to make it significantly easier for businesses to pay license fees, to register, to do permits. You need to be able to make it so that they can legitimize themselves, or they can legitimize their employees, so to speak, without having to pay significant penalties. You have to incentivize them. And we're not really doing that right now. And one of the real problems that LA has that San Francisco does not have, that Seattle does not have to the same way, is the fact that those cities have much lower, not just official unemployment rates, but they have much lower functional unemployment rates. There are just far fewer job openings. There is a far greater pressure in those cities in terms of the leverage that workers actually have than in LA, especially considering the size of the informal economy. And that's going to be a real challenge. And it's why we fundamentally have to look at ways of making it so that the overall circumstances for the workers and, quite honestly, for the businesses who hire them are improved to encourage on-the-books hiring. And if that doesn't happen, then not enough people will benefit from the minimum wage increase.
Do you want to respond? Go ahead.
So I sat next to a fellow from UPS while I was in Washington, D.C., and he said, our company is experimenting with drones right now. So I thought maybe it's, those, you get a little thing flying around, dropping off your package. No, he says he's actually talking about big trucks. I mean, the big trucks carrying a lot of packages. So what will that do to all the folks who are in the truck driving business? And then I went into the airport in Newark, and when you sit there, you get to the restaurant to have a bite. It's all via iPads. All the orders are taken via iPad, and there's only one bartender behind the the counter, rather than a whole infrastructure of waiters and waitresses. So as we think about where's the entry point for a lot of our lower skilled worker, there's an elimination of many of these jobs that is just beginning to happen. And so again, it goes back to the earlier point is we've got to figure out how to skill up our whole economy, our whole community, because this is happening all around us, and we're not going to be able to rein back the technology because we benefit, as consumers from these technology. It's a real challenge.
Yeah. Yeah, go
I was just say one thing is that as much as we're seeing this in the U.S., it's worth remembering that the countries who actually lead on this tend to be Europe and Japan, and they're countries where they actually have a worker shortage or have had that, especially Japan, because they've got aging populations, not enough kids. So they had incentives to do self-checkout lanes long before you saw them in the U.S. They've had an incentive to do, Japan robots for elderly care and various other things like that. The catch is, we're still growing. We're still adding people, and we have a lot more young people.
Which is a good thing.
Which is a very good thing. But we're adopting those same technologies. So where in Japan they might be supplanting a lack of workers, here in the U.S. they're supplanting people who could be taking those jobs.
Well, I mean, Jessica, do you want to address that? Because that is what I heard going to a lot of businesses is, oh, we're just going to cut these jobs. We can't have the delivery person anymore. We can't have the person taking your order. We're going to have the iPads, or we're going to cut back our hours.
So, I mean, it's important to remember that low-wage workers spend a larger portion of their paychecks in the communities where they live. So when you raise wages, it's not a zero-sum game. You're going to stimulate the local economy, right? And I think the impact on many businesses can be small and can be absorbed in different ways or passed on to the consumer. And where it's not, I think we just have to ask ourselves sort of what kind of economy do we want to have? Do we want to have an economy? I mean, remember, $15 an hour is you're not going to live in Santa Monica on $15 an hour. You're not going to live anywhere on the West Side. We're not talking about a really huge minimum wage. We're talking about bringing it up over a course of time to be more on par with what it used to be. It's really, it's not a transformation for those workers. It's definitely an improvement. So I think just because it's, it's going to cost some businesses more, I don't think that's a reason not to do it. I think from a policy perspective, it's a good trade-off. And I don't know that there's a lot of disagreement here. And then I think, when you're thinking about the economy as a whole and some of the challenges that we're facing, I think we need to identify those sectors where we can, with policy, make a difference and really bring up wages and look at the power that our government has, our elected government has, to really influence the economy. So when you think about it, a government is an employer, right? So those are important jobs, and we need to maintain those job standards. Many of those jobs are have really given opportunities to communities of color. You know, we have a lot of employment, a lot of public sector employment is really supporting good jobs for residents of South LA, for example, has not received a lot of investment. So we really, in our utility project, we do a lot of outreach and focus on bringing people into, doing outreach around the utility careers in South Los Angeles. Government also has an opportunity as a procurer, right? We spend billions of dollars on contracts. How can government use its power to raise wages in those sectors? And we have a Jobs to Move America project where we're using that procurement, billions of dollars that are being spent on procuring rail cars to, make sure that some of those cars actually get built here and that people have the skills to make those cars across the country. And then, the government has the power to regulate, and that's where we can raise standards with minimum wages in LA and LA County and Santa Monica and other places.
Well, California is such an interesting place because it's such a booming economy in so many ways. And you have these, most valuable companies in the world like Apple and Facebook. You have Snapchat a couple miles away from here, not even that, which is a $20 billion company. And how many employees do they have? Probably 25, 30. And this just seems
but still.
very small. And Facebook, very few employees. These are not the big aviation companies or aerospace companies that were here a couple decades ago. And that's just kind of the trend. Hard to change that.
Well, in some ways it's hard to change it, but also it's because we live in a world where very few companies control their entire supply line. Now, obviously, if you're Facebook, you're virtual, but think about the fact that Facebook creates a tremendous amount of value, but has an incredible number of essentially suppliers of product. That they've got companies who make the games, who make the apps, who make the various subcomponents of what makes Facebook Facebook and what makes it work. Apple fundamentally went from a company that used to make most everything, that they, even and if they didn't make it, they assembled it and rebranded it, to being a company that does very little of their own assembly and certainly don't make most of their components. And it was actually a big news when they said that they were going to build a plant for assembling computers here in the U.S. again. Now, mind you, they did it in Texas, but they still made one. And but that's sort of the norm, is that a lot of these companies which represent value, they have lots of pieces, these smaller companies that essentially make them possible, which is where a lot of the jobs are created. If they're the content creators or these little these tech companies that add on to it, you not just Snapchat, but if you look at what makes up Silicon Beach, what makes up a lot of these jobs that have been added that are actually paying well, these are a lot of very small companies. These are sometimes individual entrepreneurs. Maker Studios fundamentally works by having a whole bunch of artists and creators who fundamentally use them to then put stuff onto YouTube. And there are all these new opportunities and these new channels that exist. The catch is you still have to have access either to the technology or the capital or more importantly enough, the computer skills to be able to take advantage of it. And for lots and lots of people, they don't have those computer skills. They don't, you don't necessarily have the up-to-date computers in the schools that are able to, where people can get the training. And you don't have the emphasis in high school, and you certainly don't even have emphasis in many respects in many of the colleges to train people for those kinds of jobs. Vaughn is obviously leading the way in that regard, but a lot of the four-year schools are behind the curve in that, and they need to adapt as well.
So it sounds like we should be telling people, don't go to four-year college. And I know parents are going to like this, but no, I mean, more education is not necessarily a better thing, right?
Well, not necessarily. I mean, and I don't mean to denigrate people who have philosophy degrees, but when we live in a world where people are engaging in building up a lot of student debt, which I know was our last forum in that regard, but you build up on that, and you're getting it for jobs that don't necessarily pay back. It's a problem. We have in LA County one of 2 4-year schools that exist in the state with an unbelievably high hiring rate out of them. They're called the Cal Polys. Cal Poly Pomona is here. I'll admit I'm biased. I'm on a board for Pomona. But between Pomona and San Luis Obispo, you're talking about schools that have well over a 95% hire rate coming out of there. They are absurdly hard to get into. And the reason is because they basically place people in jobs, especially in the engineering programs, better than almost anywhere else. If you go to the aerospace companies, where do they go first and foremost to hire people who know how to actually work on the line or do this from a 4-year standpoint? They go to the Cal Polys. And one of the catches there for the Cal Polys and for the Cal States is that with all the budget cutbacks that have hit the Cal States, one of the main areas that's actually been affected have been programs that lead to job training or more applied training. The Cal Polys, I know that both of the engineering programs were receiving pushback from up at the state level to cut the number of engineering courses that they required for graduation. You know, you'd say, okay, well, we're trying to make it more affordable. This is better for people. But what happens when you cut a couple of those classes and they suddenly don't have the applied skills to get a job out? Well, you've saved the school system some money, but you've then proceeded to make the workers less hireable. And one of the things that happened in high schools that nobody noticed is that LAUSD a few years ago cut all of the shop classes. They just disappeared. And you can say, well, you know, shop was outdated, whatever. But fundamentally, whether or not the shop curriculum is outdated, it taught hands-on skills and got people aware of the fact that you could do something with those. And a lot of the programs that they would need to go in there at the 2-year level require that application of skills, and they pay really well, but people aren't exposed to them. But the moment that the Cal State system said, we don't require shop anymore, none of the public high schools need to require it, the LAUSD decided, okay, we're going to save some money. Gone. That was it. It was in a matter of weeks. And it saved LAUSD some money, but it probably cost the graduates from LAUSD, or even the people who didn't quite graduate, we could think the impact would be hundreds of thousands or even millions of dollars long term.
So, Vaughn, what do you say to that, though? The question of, is more education always better?
Yeah. What's important is looking at what type of education is very important. So let me give you kind of just two comparison, even just at the community college level, and then I'll go to the 4-year level. So, for example, you can choose to be a library technician. That is a career pathway. Or you can take the same kind of skill and you can go into a data science analyst, okay? The same skill set, if you go into the library area, you know that there aren't that many librarians retiring every year, within the region. But right now, the Silicon Valley will just pick you up like this at $75,000 if you have anything on your vitae that says data science, data analytics. So it's the choice. It's a choice. Same skill, same person, but which choice? And especially since the LA region is going to become a Latino majority much faster than the rest of the state and the country. It is also true that Latinos in particular are less aware of the range of educational option and are actually choosing educational pathways that end up with lower earning capacity rather than choosing the data science pathway. So that's kind of one observation.
Why do you think that is?
It's about career awareness too, right? It's how many coders and programmers and data visualization people around you, and so making those choices also calls for you to be informed. So again, I go back to my point. It really for us to sort of intervene these cycles. It's going to take all of us to bring out the awareness on what are good post-secondary options, what are good choices, whether it's within the community college or in the 4-year. The other thing that I kind of want to talk about is really this concept of stackability of credentials. When I was over in the private sector, I worked with a number of other utilities, and we put in place this 1-year electrical and power line certificates. It's 1 year. And we thought, it dealt with high voltage, low voltage, and a certain specialty set of skills. And we thought this would be more the typical community college student base, getting their first skill. What we discovered was there are all these engineers in this program. They already had their BA, but what they had found was that they were in the job market. And if you remember back to how you studied, you did maybe 2 years liberal arts, and then you began to specialize, and you have a specialty in the last year. Well, that skill set in the last year was no longer as relevant. So they actually came back to the community colleges, or it can be other institutions, to restack their skills. And those individuals went off and needed no assistance to find jobs. They were just restacking their skill. So I think that's another concept, which is, it's not that you can get, if I said, yes, the skills you got or the training you got or the education you got at 22 is going to last you 50 years. Now that I say it, it sounds like a somewhat ridiculous notion. The shelf life of the knowledge and skills had become shorter and shorter. So I think the challenge for us, whether we have BAs, masters, doctorates, AAs, is that we're going to have to come back, and that we need the institutions to have these options for us to stack our credentials and restack our credentials.
Yeah, go.
Yeah, just building on that point, I think what you're seeing is technology and the proliferation of technology across the industry is driving the need to continually try to retool your skills and continually try to adapt. You mentioned, this library tech or data analytics option. How much longer are we actually going to have libraries? How many people actually go to libraries anymore to get a book, or do you open up your computer to get a book, right? So I'm not saying they don't exist, but I'm sure it's dwindling, right? And so where is technology heading, and how is it affecting businesses? And do we realize as a workforce that you need to adapt and continually learn how those things affect you? And as a utility, I wouldn't say we're the quickest to adopt technology, right? Utilities are not known for how quickly we jump on new technology.
That's okay. We don't want our system to crash.
But if you see us changing and you see a utility trying to adopt technology, that's a sign that technology is out there impacting businesses all across the industry. And if that's a sign that those changes are happening even, at utilities, then that should be a sign to us that the education in those type of technologies should be an ever evolving thing and an ever sought after thing. And you can't be satisfied with, a 4-year degree or a 2-year degree for the rest of your life. You need to continually build upon that to be relevant in the workplace.
But Russell, you sound very hopeful about technology, but technology is bad for workers overall. It's been a bad thing for wages, and you think about the gig economy now, and Uber and Lyft and all these people who have to cobble together these things, and it's like the new waiter or waitress scene. These are not careers, but it's something a lot of people have to do.
I would say it's good or bad depending on how you respond to it.
All right. What do you think?
I think is that the problem isn't technology. The problem is that the rate at which new technology is being adopted, and the fact that society is not necessarily coping with it very well. The fact is that if we want to, we go back in the argument of technology. I'm sure everybody would like to go back to the days where people had life expectancies of 35 to 40, and if a high quality job that people actually scrambled for was working in a coal mine where you were going to die of black lung or have a cave-in or something like that. And you say, well, why would people scramble for that? Because those jobs paid significantly better. They were actually a higher paying job that gave families better lives and escaped, whether you go and worked in an early factory or anything like that.
But what about the height of the aerospace industry?
Well,
in Southern
but that's the
California?
thing.
Good union jobs.
But there are good union jobs. But what we're dealing with is that the technology for making those planes was not evolving that much. The technology, if you forget that fundamentally the basic setup for industrial manufacturing, not the products they made, but the way we made those planes, didn't really change very much from the 1930s to the 1970s or 80s. That a lot of those processes were really constant. What's happened now is that once robotics came in, once we came up with this ability to go all over the world and to subcontract all over the world basically because of computers and improved communications, it suddenly, you had a breakup of what had been these consolidated systems. And that's part of the problem. One of the reasons you have a gig economy, if you think about it, is because technology makes it possible. But communications technology. And what winds up happening is at some point there's a pushback. The issue is that how do we get it so that the people have a higher skill level so that they can access the jobs that don't require them to be in the gig economy. The gig economy is an option. If you want to drive for Uber, you do it to earn some extra money on the weekend or in your off hours or anything like that, rather than because you have to. And I know people, I've known multiple people who've actually gone to work for Uber or Lyft where fundamentally they were unemployable. They actually had mobility issues or they had other concerns which kept them out of the regular workforce. And they suddenly found that because they had good driving skills, they had good access to a vehicle, they had knowledge of the routes and roads and whatever else, they suddenly had a job again, for the first time in years. I've run into multiple people like that. So, in that case, they are benefiting from it. It doesn't necessarily help for the more established systems. It certainly doesn't help taxi drivers. But opportunities can be created with that technology. What you need to do as much as anything else is to make sure that the system is fair, that the system matures, and that the people are really ready for it, and the ones who need to take advantage of it can. And quite honestly, the people who should be doing something else, that we give them the skills and the opportunities to go in a different career pathway so that there's not this labor surplus that is being taken advantage of.
Mm-hmm. You guys want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, I think one thing we need to be watchful about is that, it used to be that, retail jobs were just, some extra money that someone needed to make. Fast food jobs were really just for teenagers. And over time, what we've seen is people are working for years in fast food. People are working for years at Walmart. And those jobs are basic, those are their jobs. And so I think the so-called sharing economy or the gig economy is something that my organization is taking a really close look at, because I think what might start as something extra might be that we have to see what its trajectory is going to be, and ask ourselves what kind of economy we really want. Do we want, most people, they want to be able to spend some time with their family. They want to be able to pay their bills. They want some security. They want health insurance. And so those are the goals, and the policies that we set as a city, as a country, they're the ground rules. And so I think we don't want to, I'm not really hearing this on this panel, but I'm just, I think sometimes there's this sense that the market forces are what they are, technology is what it is, and we don't have control over outcomes. And I think we really do, and we're sort of at a pivotal moment right now, where there's so much of work is being, so much risk is being shifted onto workers. And so I think we need to start to, take that back. And, and it really, in my view, it really, it's organizing is really a critical way that we're gonna raise standards in any industry. It's always been that way. I think, education is really critical for mobility as well, and those are the two things that need to work together.
So I guess a fundamental question is, how much of a skills gap is there versus just how much have jobs changed and there's not that many well-paying jobs anymore?
There's a fair number of well-paying jobs.
So
there's about 5.8 million open jobs right now. It's I guess it's the easy answer is all the above, all the above. But there's another dimension that we haven't talked about, and it's a benefit of technology is around entrepreneurship. So one of the great things about technology, for example, is the arrival of crowdsourced funding, companies like Kiva, for example, and the ability, for people who want to start ventures to be able to get capital that is not at the level of a bank. So it's a riskier capital. Maybe you can get $500 loans up to $10,000 loans instead of the threshold that banks operate at. So one of the strategies that this Kiva fellow was sharing with me, he's wanting to do economic development in the community of Richmond, and says, I want to do a place-based approach where we place maybe a retailer with a barber shop with a child care, right? And so, and then bring capital to help those three do entrepreneurship and business formation. So the question is then, for example, the community college, we're one of the great producers of the cosmetology programs, the retailing programs, and early childhood education. Could you actually introduce the components of access to capital and those skill sets earlier on into the communities, so the communities can begin to build equity and capital and build business, which has always been a kind of core to the fabric of America.
Well, we're going to go to questions in just a second. But first, I just wanted to add the final piece of this, which is housing prices. So, I'm curious, Russell, when you're trying to recruit people here from Texas, is that difficult?
Yes.
Or can they just live in San
Yes,
Bernardino?
is the short answer. Although, being Southern California, Edison covers 50,000 square miles of service territory. So, not all of our employees need to live in Santa Monica, fortunately. So there's other areas of Southern California, and we've established a hub kind of further east. Our transmission and distribution hub is located in Pomona, actually on the Cal Poly Pomona campus. Which gives an opportunity for, as you travel further east, there's more affordable housing, right? So it is, I guess further away from LA County. But I think we can compete somewhat in terms of wages that we can offer versus where there are various places to locate within Southern California. And we kind of have that luxury, I guess, as a company that has a large expanse of area that we cover, that there's a lot of options for people and where they locate.
So, Kevin, how big a problem is housing for our economy here?
It's a major problem, and it really comes down to is that when we were, not to completely go on a tangent, but when we were adding housing stock during the mid-2000s, we were adding a housing stock based on selling a lifestyle. We were building McMansions, large houses, unsustainably large, impractical houses out not near jobs. We were building them very heavily up in Palmdale and Lancaster, and we were building them out in Calabasas, or we were building them even further out to the west and the east, and out in locations where the commutes were not sustainable. And when gas prices spiked, people suddenly realized, hey, we can't make this work. If you look at the resurgence in housing prices that have happened over the last 2 to 3 years especially, but especially since the recession ended, it is fundamentally tied to proximity to jobs. That the massive spikes on the west side have happened because of what were previously relatively affordable neighborhoods, because of the fact that they have shorter commutes. They're easier to get to the jobs. It's not just the housing, it's the mobility, it's how long your commute is, how hard is it to get to the well-paying jobs. You have communities that are located along the Gold Line corridor, out east, that runs out to Pasadena and out to East LA, which has seen massive spikes in property values because they offer easier access to the jobs, because they mean that you don't have to take a car, that you don't have to take a bus, which might not be on time because it's stuck in the morass of traffic, and that access to these well-paying jobs is fundamentally driving up values, because all we did was, when we needed to add housing stock, we were so afraid of growth, or we were so afraid of skyscrapers, we were even so afraid of townhouses, that we didn't build them near where the jobs actually were. And by not redeveloping and rezoning to make slightly larger buildings or various things, and certainly not adding enough houses for families, the result is that the value of a house that can sustain a 2 or 3 kid family, that is close to a job that's going to pay well over $100,000, that ratio is just utterly unsustainable, just because the stock is not there.
Jessica, I mean, you guys have primarily addressed this through higher wages, but of course, $15 is still not really enough for average rent here.
It's a huge problem, and you have, overcrowding in many neighborhoods in Los Angeles. With our efforts to reduce greenhouse gases, we're trying to do more development near transit, and the problem you have there is it produces higher housing prices, gentrification, and then you're pushing poorer people out to the periphery. And so I think I don't think raising wages is sufficient. There needs to be a strategy to build more affordable housing. There needs to be a public role in housing for the people who are very, very low income. And I think it's a major issue.
Maybe the Olympics will help spur that. We'll see.
As long as the development's in the right place.
Yes. All right. Well, let's go to the audience. We have a lot of questions, and so and actually we're emailing them and texting them in. So we have them here that people have sent in, but if you still have them, feel free to text them in. So this is the first question. I'll read it. If grads with skills must leave the state to find work, how is education and workforce training a solution to the dearth of business job expansion? We seem to be stuck in a negative cycle. Who wants to take that one?
Well, I would argue grads with skills don't have to leave the state. What it comes down to is that they will get lured out of state a certain amount of time because they're high in demand, or but in many cases, the issue is that they'll have skills, but they don't necessarily match the jobs. And that's really the bigger issue, is that the people go and they go through these programs and they wind up with skills, but they don't necessarily match what the jobs are. And one of the big things, and Juan can talk about and Russ could talk about, is that employers need to do something that they haven't really done, and they've been in a trend away from for the last 20, 30 years, which is be much more involved in training people for those jobs, or voicing out to the educational institutions what kind of training they actually need. And that makes a huge difference, because it means that the employers have the ability to recruit right out of school, knowing these people that they're recruiting will match their needs. And it makes a huge difference for a student, because they are much more likely to take a program and follow a certain skill set if they think that the odds go up dramatically that they're going to have a job once they're done.
Vaughn, do you want to weigh in?
Well, Jessica's been trying to make the point that there's a role for planning and government and et cetera. And maybe this is the area where, instead of employers saying, we have a gap, can't find it, how come you didn't read my mind? This is the opportunity where we really need the multiple sectors, and I'm talking about the education sector and the employment sector, to talk to each other and just work together, and as Russ said, define what you want, so that at the end of the day there's a reliability in the workforce pipeline. Otherwise, you're going to end up with, instead of a talent pool, you're going to get a talent puddle, which is what a lot of employers are experiencing right now, because there's too much guesswork between the parties versus actually working together to set those pathways and define what kind of skills, what kind of requirements are needed in the individuals that come out with these credentials.
And how good do you think your community colleges are now at talking to employers?
Well, we've in the last few years, we've embarked on a strategy called Doing What Matters for Jobs and the Economy, Doing What Matters for Jobs and the Economy. And the idea was, how do we take our limited resources and begin to really target them at industry sectors that drive regional economies? And so when we asked the regions to prioritize, 14 out of the 15 regions picked the healthcare sector, which, by the way, is just growing straight up. 14 out of the 15 regions picked information and communication technology / digital media. 8 out of the 15 picked advanced manufacturing. And, there's global trade, there's agriculture, water, environmental technology. So there's life science and biotech. So every region has different priorities. And the key is, how do we make sure that there's an alignment between what education is offering with those industry sectors, so that we begin to produce more students with the skill sets and map to the interests of the economy, so that they're able to work within their region. Most students, especially from the community college, about 80% end up staying, right?
All right, let's look at the next question here. If SoCal is the capital of entrepreneurs, could you elaborate on the barriers facing newly formed companies? How available are angel investors, small business, microloans, or conventional bank loans? Who wants to take that one?
Yeah, that is me, because I've actually spent a bit of time talking to the SBA and some others on this. The answer is not nearly as available as they should be. And that's part of the issue, is that we get great entrepreneurs, huge number of entrepreneurs who are foreign-born, who bring their skill sets and their ideas to here in Southern California, and they're able to establish their companies, but they don't grow. And they don't grow because there isn't easy enough access. And part of the problem is that we live in an environment of really low interest rates. And I know that everybody's afraid of the Fed raising rates. Well, I can tell you this right now. For small businesses, raise the rates. It's actually a good thing, because what it means right now is that we're in an environment where, for banks, their margins for lending to small businesses aren't good enough quite often to cover the risks they have to take. And if you're looking at angel investors, that is growing here in Southern California. That you have a lot of Northern California investors who have come down. You have a number of angel investors who come in. The VC community is growing, but it tends to target certain sectors. And it doesn't necessarily target a lot of the areas that LA as a whole has. Everybody knows about entertainment. We know about technology related to entertainment and video games and things like that. But what about all the other great ideas that are out there? Whether it's manufacturing or food or a specialized service or something like that. And that isn't as robust. Northern California proportionately is a lot better in terms of having a larger access to capital relative to the number of businesses. That being said, it still tends to be targeted in certain areas, in certain sectors. And LA, for as many problems as it has, is still far better off than, say, the San Joaquin Valley is, where people aren't making the loans to the same degree because they don't understand the risks. And that's one of the things that really needs to change, is that there needs to be a way of understanding the risks and getting these loans to these small businesses to hire people. And I mean, it's a long, complicated process, but there are potential solutions. And I'm hoping that actually, as interest rates go back up, that'll benefit small businesses, because right now it's only really benefiting very large ones.
Our next question is, can any of you share more examples of smart, sustained nonprofits or other programs that are training our future workforce? And I think the answer is yes.
I'd like to take a shot at this. So the Department of Water and Power is the largest municipal utility in the country. It employs about 8,800 workers, and 40% are at or near retirement age. So there's a huge need for new workforce. And at the same time, City of LA has some communities with really high rates of unemployment. And so a couple years back, the department with its union, the IBW Local 18, got together to start a training program intended to prepare workers for careers in the utility. It's called the Utility Pre-Craft Trainee Program. It's just a name that really rings. And basically, it's for entry-level workers. In order to get into the program, you need an 8th grade level of education and an LA County driver's license. And you need to get through the hiring process. But basically, they were looking for people who had a will to work hard and to learn. And so it's a earn while you learn program. And I think that's one of the really appealing parts of it. So trainees get $16 an hour plus benefits, and they get classroom training, and they get on-the-job training, and they're exposed to different areas of the utility: water, power, warehouse. And one of the challenges they were having at the utility, and I'm sure you can speak to this too, is they were spending a huge amount of money training future line workers, for example, and then people would climb a pole and decide, you know what, this is really not for me. Thank you very much, and out the door. And so this way, the trainees, and there have been about 200. Get to sort of a taste of the different parts of the utility. They get to different supervisors, work with different journeymen, and we've seen great success. People who've come into the program who are now on the steam plant assistant training program, and they're moving into civil service jobs. And one of the things I think I'm most proud about, we've been sort of advocates and supporters of the pipeline, is they've really made an effort to advocate for fair hiring for people who've been in the criminal justice system. So you've got people who are getting into the program and really able to turn their lives around and get amazing skills. And they're women, about 14% women, which is very high in the craft field. So that's one example. There's a bit of a waiting list, not surprisingly, to get into the program.
Yes, okay. Well, our next question is for Van, and it's a good one. What jobs would you suggest for boomers who are looking to retrain themselves and can take courses offered at community college?
If you already have the house in Santa Monica, I would like to invite you to come back into the classroom. We're going to have a shortage in terms of career technical education instructors, and students really benefit from your experience in the workforce. Actually, we're doing our own internal reforms so that it's easier for experienced professionals to come back into the workforce. And it's not just ours. The K-12 workforce will also have the same problem. So we invite you into the classroom.
All right. All right. Similar to shop class, most schools in LAUSD do not offer the arts to their students. Are there enough jobs in the creative economy to warrant spending on arts education, and how can we prepare our youth for these jobs? Kevin?
All right. Well, there are a couple things. First is that arts education, if you're going in and teaching your kids basic arts, if you're teaching them pottery or drawing or anything like that, no, you're not necessarily going to get them a job doing video games or doing online content or working on a motion picture. It doesn't necessarily align unto itself. The benefits of arts education are a lot broader. There are correlations between music and math attainment. There are correlations between arts and creative thinking and being able to think outside the box and being able to do design jobs and do a whole variety of different things. There are lots and lots of benefits to arts education in that regard, and it is significant. If you're looking at the creative economy, it's a mix of things. Some of it is very much benefits from arts, benefits from having that kind of training. Some of it, quite honestly, can be computer programming. It can be general high-end technical skills, because that's the way those jobs have evolved. Some of it's vocational training. It's worth remembering that the unions in the entertainment industry are among the greatest ongoing vocational trainers in the world in terms of training people for high-paying, high-skilled jobs, and they do it very well. The main catch it comes down to is that how do you access that system? Because you got to know a guy who knows a guy who knows a gal who knows who knows your cousin who knows something else, and that access to that training is somewhat restricted, and so that becomes part of the system. But so many new companies are springing up that are trying to benefit from the creative economy. And in those situations, it really is access to the technology, access to a certain amount of, very clearly, arts exposure, and access to the ability to think creatively and do something to apply that. And some of the best programs that are there are expensive. I mean, they're not cheap, and they're not that easy for people to know about. In a lot of cases, what you really need is just people to have access to those computers to learn, and access to the arts so that they are inclined in that direction, and knowledge of where those jobs are, so that they actually understand where those pathways are and know how to apply.
And so, Vaughn, do you have programs for people who want to go work at Riot Games and design? And
So MIT has changed how they want to admit students. They said, the report card and the standardized scores is just insufficient to predict the success of these students. Instead, they want to see the maker portfolio. And people know the maker portfolio, maker, hacker, do-it-yourselfer. It's a phenomenon where there's creativity and experimentation, because one of the issues we have in the creative economy, it wants critical thinking, it wants collaboration, it wants communication, it wants creativity. And so part of creativity is the ability to experiment and fail and experiment again and fail and experiment, right? So part of when we think about STEM and STEAM skills, when we think about creative economy, what we have to do is make sure we have the context of the environment for students and all of us to actually experiment and fail and try again, because those are the skills of the creative economy, not necessarily some of the more rote stuff that we have to do. So can the arts enable that? Can hacker, maker, do-it-yourselfer environments enable that? Those are the things that we actually need to stimulate in addition to the normal curriculum.
Okay. Now that we've lost the aerospace and other manufacturing jobs, well, not all of them, remember, LA is still the manufacturing capital. How can we get politicians at all levels, mayors, congressional representatives, senators, and state officials, to push for California jobs? Kevin?
All right, I guess. All right, I'll answer one more time. Sorry, I'm not trying to hog anything here, but a certain amount of it is that there needs to be an acknowledgement of what kind of jobs are being lost. That there have been moments where at the state level people have realized, hey, we really should go after something. But the way the system is set up right now, they tend to be one-offs. The way that the regulatory environment is, you actually have to create exceptions to go after something. I mean, people remember the Tesla Gigafactory and how big a deal that was, and that California actually made a bid for it. It went to Nevada because Nevada just basically did a blow-your-socks-off bid that it's not clear will ever pay for itself, because Nevada wanted to have these high-tech manufacturing jobs because it didn't have them, and it was willing to overpay for the sake of getting that. But when Boeing was talking about adding a new line for its 777 commercial airliner, and it was giving first choice to Seattle, and Seattle nearly lost it, we made a real bid for it. And actually, if it weren't for a barely won union vote in Seattle, we might well have gotten that line. But it was done as a one-off. What we need to realize is that there needs to be a comprehensive strategy, in that we need to get the different groups. We need the unions, especially the industrial unions, to realize that this is the way to add new union jobs, and to have them be brought back in on a larger scale. And we need to realize that overall, though, that it's the small businesses that are really the ones creating most of the jobs, and that we need to adapt our regulations, we need to adapt our capital, we need to adapt our workforce training to fundamentally focus on those small businesses. Because the biggest problem that California had in the recession, if you look at the underlying numbers, wasn't even the loss of overall manufacturing. It was the fact that it was small businesses and small manufacturing that was really being hit. It was that small businesses did not recover nearly as quickly this time as they had in the past. And that fundamentally it is the small businesses, in targeting those small businesses who are really the main manufacturers who are left in LA, and making an environment that allows them to grow, it benefits everybody. And that it's not about, the fat cats getting rich. It's about your small entrepreneurial business owners, quite often who are immigrants or children of immigrants, and who come with these extra skills and want to hire more people with these skills. We want to make it possible.
Yeah, and Northrop Grumman got the stealth bomber contract last week. They're going to build a lot of that here probably, and the state gave them $500 million in tax incentives.
Because it had to, because because we're so expensive.
And that's still a good deal for
It's still a good
the state?
deal. That's the amazing thing. It drives us crazy. I mean, you think about $500 million sounds horrific, and then you realize the ancillary benefits go into the billions. And the problem is with the environment right now is that lots of states are offering deals to different manufacturers and big ticket items. But think about the fact that right now, if that bomber gets made here, and yes, you can wince about the fact that it's a bomber as opposed to something else, but when the C-17 cargo plane line gets shut down, that was it for large airplanes being made in California. I mean, there's nothing else. And the fact is that if the bombers get made here, and it's worth remembering that for the F-18 and the F-35, even though nobody talks about it, large chunks of them are still being made here in the LA County as well, that these are high in demand, high skilled elements. And as much as it may bother people that we're not spending money on something else, the fact is that when you have skilled workers who are created from these programs, and when you have those programs here, there are a lot of other programs that get attracted to it. And when we have satellites that are made here, when we have components for high tech airplanes and all that are designed here, that happens because you also happen to have some of the defense money.
Yeah, I think we really have to be cautious about engaging in bidding wars for companies that, to locate in California or in one city versus another city, most especially. And to remember that, we do have the state of California, our local governments spend in the billions of dollars, and that spending, if it's done wisely, can really be used to leverage good jobs. And so we should be thoughtful. I mentioned, procurement of rail cars is one huge way in which we're spending money. Are those rail cars going to be built in the U.S.? Can they be built in California? That's something that we're working on at my organization. Other areas where there's going to be job growth, we're talking about utilities. We're really transforming where our power comes from, moving away from fossil fuel towards more renewables. Those are that's more labor intensive. They're jobs, can we make sure those jobs are good jobs and they're available? We're going to be getting less water from the Sierra due to global warming. So we need to rebuild our water system. Those are also jobs here in California. So those are some of the places that we can look.
Well, our last question is this, and it says, can information and communications technology jobs benefit the local economy when knowledge and technology workers can work anywhere in the world? Vaughn, do you want to take that one?
I'll say hands down, yes.
All right.
I mean, if you think, okay, so, all right, let's think of what we think as typically kind of a lower skill area, retail. It turns out that in order to move up kind of the chain of command within the retail sector, it's actually IT skills, right? If you want to move up, build some IT skills. That's what the employers are saying. And I mentioned health informatics. Well, information systems, data systems, I mean, that undergirds the entire healthcare delivery system. So there's, and we've already talked about even the technology industry, the entertainment industry, us going to work in an office. It's technology based now. You have to know the Microsoft Office suites, et cetera, or else we're just not literate for what is considered currently literate for the office environment. So just the core skills in ICT, but also there's many other jobs where they're local because the sectors are also locals. Back to I just want to make one final point back to what Kevin was saying. There is action at the regional level. if we are better organized to compete for the innovation hubs, for example, there are innovation hubs that came out as a competition for additive manufacturing, which is 3D manufacturing, 4D manufacturing. Well, we didn't win it. We were not as well organized as other regions within the country. That's where we could be more competitive. Flexible technology, new frontiers, dark fibers. I mean, there's so many of these technologies coming out. What we need to do is be organized to bring these technologies here so that we build expertise and build the supply chain to be more competitive as regions.
Well, we're just about out of time, but I want to end with a lightning round. The Republican candidates aren't allowing it, but you guys did not agree to that precondition. So I'm going to do one, and it's kind of unfair because it's a very broad question, but it's basically asking you to just give us a little window into the future, because we've talked a lot about what's happened the last 30 years, and to just think about what these sort of issues and what the state and its workforce looks like in the next few decades. And Russell, let's start with you and then move down the panel.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely going to be a more technical economy, and we're going to see technology proliferating every business that we have out there. And we're seeing it already in the areas of data and data analytics, and simple companies just using this data to understand their customer better. And we're going to see it in ways of automation. We're going to see it in ways of controls. We're going to see it in ways of computing platforms. And so our workforce needs to be prepared for that and needs to understand that it's a continuous evolution. What we see as the technology of today, we won't even recognize in 5 years. And so we need to be prepared to be able to continually learn and continually evolve to those needs.
Jessica?
I echo that on technology and just would add the idea of sustainability. We need to be gentler with the planet, and we've got major policy pushes moving us in that direction. And their employment implications. We need cool roofs, more energy efficient buildings, more conservation, and better systems like smart grids to help us accomplish that.
Fun.
Traditionally, we only had one kind of C in our vocabulary, which was the big C, traditional credentials, long terminal degree, associate's degree, bachelor's degree, master's. I think the future world of competition is going to be based on combination of big C's and little C's. Credentials awarded based on badges, micro-credentials, certificates. So communities will compete based on, ooh, we've got one big C and 5 little c ratio instead of just the big C.
More people going to community college as a proportion than 4-year, you think?
All sorts of credentials.
Okay. Kevin?
I think the big thing is going to be that everybody's going to be working longer. We'll have, people's life expectancies are longer, but we also fundamentally can't retire because of the nature of lack of savings. But what it really means is that we're going to see fundamentally a shift towards everybody accepting that continuing education and retraining is essential, that employers will realize it, that people in the workforce will realize it, that there's no stigma against it, that we have a huge number of people who are not being fundamentally utilized to their full potential. Mothers who've been out of the workforce who want to come back in, people who were working at more traditional manufacturing jobs who now need new skills and adapt them. A whole range of people where they're going to get re-educated, and employers are going to realize that it's vastly to their benefit to have people who already have a tremendous number of skills, but just need to adapt them to what their current needs are. And that, I think, will happen a great deal.
All right, well, thank you so much, you guys, for coming out. Thank you to the whole team at Milken for having us, and the whole team at KPCC, and thank you very much.